Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me for this coffee skills workshop. We are going to compare and contrast specialty coffee versus commercial grade coffee. My name is Andrea Piccolo. I will be your instructor, your facilitator. I am going to be your guide to discovering the world of specialty coffee. There's some familiar faces there, some adorable coffee drinkers. Before we get to this, I took a moment to just introduce myself, if we can, so that we have we're going to spend the next 45 minutes together. And I'd love this to be a collaborative, welcoming, enjoyable space. And let's just take a minute or two, just introduce yourselves, and we'll get to know who's in the room today.
I'm Claudia, and I am a coffee drinker.
Fabulous. Thanks, Claudia.
I'm Liz, and I don't usually drink coffee, but I do now and then, so I'm curious to learn a little bit more about it.
Okay, great.
And I'm John. I'm a connoisseur of coffee from basic to specialty.
Okay, great. I'm going to be looking forward to some of your insights on what you know about commercial and specialty coffee. Excellent. Thank you all. So to start, I thought these images of youngsters enjoying coffee might give us some indication on evoking memories of some of our first coffee memories. Does anyone want to take a minute and think about that? Think about those first coffee experiences you had. You may not have been this young. This is decaf. Just in case anyone's concerned, that's decaf for that little one. But what were some of the first coffee memories you have? Are they good? Are they delicious? Are they like, why are people drinking this stuff? What's exciting about?
I used to drink my dad's leftover coffee from his thermos.
Okay. and how old were you?
Young.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it was, but I would still drink it. So.
And what were you thinking? Is this like delicious?
Well, it was like iced coffee.
Oh, okay.
And it was all right.
Yeah.
I think it was just the nabob or whatever. I don't know what my dad would
Folgers.
drink. Yeah.
Folgers crystals?
Maybe Folgers.
Okay. Maybe.
Yeah.
My first experiences were the way we used to make coffee, which was dehydrated, add water.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, instant coffee.
Instant
coffee.
Yeah.
And my grandparents used to eat their cereal with
Oh,
it, actually.
that's
and
right.
Okay. Yeah, different.
Yeah. Raisin bran. Raisin
Coffee.
bran with 2 scoops of instant
Oh wow.
and sugar.
I've never heard that.
Yes,
It's
that's
very
a different
unique. I
one.
thought you might find that
Mhm.
amusing. Yeah.
Mhm, I can see it. Different cultures, different backgrounds use coffee differently.
That's specialty.
That is specialty.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing to say, well, different cultures.
Yeah. That's all allowable. There's no wrong answer. Did I tell you that? There's no wrong answer to this.
And the percolator. Mom would do the percolator.
Oh, yeah, that's the other.
espresso.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's what they would do.
Yeah.
That's my first memory, is either in the camping trailer we had at
Mhm.
Hatsick or at home, smelling coffee.
Smelling
Maybe
coffee.
as a young kid, not drinking it was very, in the mornings, it was awesome. Then it was bitter. I didn't like the taste, not until like my mid-20s would I get into a routine of having it.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I think that's very common. Definitely as your taste buds expand, getting into the ritual of coffee, and as you start to become an adult, that you start to experiment with what that mysterious kind of drink is. And then you may realize that there's quite a range of the coffee tastes that you can have depending maybe on who's making it for you or what coffee shop you're going to. All right, we are going to watch a few commercials of coffee through the years, and I'll get your thoughts on this.
Harold, is the coffee all right?
Mm-mm.
You mean it's as bad as yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
No improvement at all?
Mm-mm.
Harold, don't just shake your head. You've got to tell me what's wrong with the coffee.
Bad taste.
Now, what am I going to do? Oh, Mary, hi. Hello, Jane. Listen, help me out, will you? Harold hates my coffee. What kind do you use? Instant Folgers. Instant Folgers? Tastes good as fresh pert. foot is fresh perked. I'll try it.
Gene, this coffee is delicious. Do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same kind we've been using, is it?
Mm-mm.
Don't just shake your head. Explain why that coffee's so good.
Good taste.
Tastes good as fresh perked. Instant Folgers.
All right, instant Folgers from the 1950s. All right, we're gonna move on to Nabob. Now, Nabob commercial in the 1990s.
Our experts conduct one final test to ensure our carefully selected coffee beans meet Nabob's high standards for flavor and aroma. Because we know when we choose only Nabob beans, you'll follow them anywhere. And for coffee lovers, there's our new 1 kilogram size for even more of Nabob's flavor and aroma.
Ooh, even more. All right, from 1992. You might remember that. I do.
I do.
Yeah. And here's one more. Not a commercial.
Because of the complexity of coffee and because of the way that it drives us, makes us feel, I think it occupies kind of this special place in our culture. Because it's always been like that. Over centuries, that sort of connectivity, that sort of exchange is consistent. Tastes to me like good sweet honey.
So this is a trailer actually from a film about coffee, called A Film About Coffee. And I like to put that in as a contrast to the other two commercials. And so what was the biggest difference that you noticed between how coffee was communicated and advertised from the 50s, in this one, even into the 90s? Was there anything noticeable?
Well, like the other one was more like where it comes from, so it's like you're actually seeing the real beans, whereas you don't see anything about coffee, like the actual coffee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
especially
just cartoons and drawing or black and white and instant.
Bring that back up. There we go.
Because of the
Hello,
complexity of our
coffee
experts
all right?
conduct one
Here
final
we go.
test to ensure our carefully selected.
What stuck out to me the most between even the first two, the evolution from the 50s into the 90s, was we're talking primarily about taste. We're shaming that poor housewife for not being able to make it. So is the focus on the coffee so much, or are we really just focusing on what a woman's role is and more about society and how she has to go to her friend to, please tell me how to make a good
Get
cup
some
of
help.
coffee to save my marriage. And I was doing the deep dive into these commercials. That was the theme of the 50s. And then into the 90s, we started to talk a little bit about taste. You start to see the coffee stacks in front of option A, B, and C. So you start to think, okay, this is actually a product. These people are starting, they care about it. The people that make it care about it. So you're getting a little bit more into coffee and into quality. And then this film about coffee really started to communicate coffee as a ritual, as something that is crafted, that comes actually from a place of origin, where it's harvested, where it's cultivated, and it's grown with care, and that there's actually people behind it. So you start to see the specialty aspect of it, and where the fruits of people's work comes from, and the outcome. So that's the biggest shift that I see from than just having it be something that is also freeze dried. The quality that we're talking about here is probably not something that's going to go to be freeze dried and
Yes.
sold in a jar, hot water added. Now, thinking about that, does anyone want to guess what the proportion of coffee is graded as specialty? So I've got some figures, a little bit of trivia, of some figures of for the United States, and which is pretty accurate to the global coffee economy. But what proportion would be specialty versus what's up for being freeze dried?
20%.
Any guesses? Interesting.
How much?
20%.
20%. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was thinking 10.
10. Okay.
Just how much just regular coffees in the store shelves. It's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And then thinking about even just the number of coffee shops that would be serving more of the specialty grade, it is about 5%.
Whoa.
Yeah. So often we view it as a pyramid with just the top cream of the crop, 5%. So that's of the coffee that's shipped into the United States and graded is considered specialty grade. And I thought this figure was fascinating. In 2023, the value of that was $8 billion.
The 5% was $8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like
Wow.
that's
Yeah,
60 billion
yeah. It is.
overall.
Yeah, an often quoted statistic is that it's one of the biggest traded items in value-wise, second to oil, is the commodity of coffee. This I thought was interesting, just to start to wrap our brain around where the coffee's coming from into the United States. Colombia and Brazil, as we can think of as two major coffee producing origins, those are the top countries of coffee that gets imported or exported into the United States, that the US imports it. Switzerland is now the third. Now I have to think about that for a minute. Switzerland is where a lot of roast and ground coffee comes from. So when coffee is ground, so Colombia and Brazil would be unroasted coffee going into the United States, exactly. And then Switzerland will roast it and grind it. It's a lot in espresso. That will get shipped into the United States. Because then I started thinking, Canada, what's going on with that? But Swiss Water Decaf is the Canadian decaffeinator, and therefore once coffee is decaffeinated, it becomes a product of Canada, once it's decaffeinated in Canada, and therefore that is how we get Canada. So there you are.
So it's different than the origins of coffee.
Yes, that is now no matter if it's decaffeinated as Brazil or Colombia, once it's decaffeinated in the country of origin, and it would be Canada as a decaffeination country, then it becomes a product of Canada. All right. So I want to recap. Now, by the end of the rest of our session here, I'm hoping that we are able to understand the differences between specialty and commercial grade coffee, talk about why it matters, and be able to articulate that difference and why it's necessary. Why is it necessary to know why specialty coffee is one way and why commercial coffee is another way? Well, one of the very interesting aspects of both specialty and commercial coffee is traceability and the supply chain. So, has anyone ever thought about where your coffee comes from? I've given you some ideas. It comes from Switzerland, it's roast and ground, it comes from Colombia, Brazil. But how we actually get a cup of coffee from one place, the coffee farm, to the consumer into a cup of coffee in our hands. Thinking back to those commercials, it wasn't really until we started talking about specialty coffee that we even acknowledged that coffee came from a farm. It goes through some procurement and it goes through some processing. It gets sorted, it gets graded, and that's an important step. And then it is got some information from the farmer and that data is collected. Now talks about traceability, and it's very important for specialty coffee to be able to communicate and maintain its value, to talk about traceability and the different hands it touches along the supply chain. It is also sourced then by the company, so a coffee roaster or a coffee importer will source it and talk to the farmers. They'll get a sample and then they'll decide how much that coffee is worth and pay that. It gets labeled. Now they're talking about smart labeling and digital invoicing, and this is because this was picked up from blockchain traceability. It is exported to the retailer and wholesaler, so that means it gets roasted and it gets ground and it gets packaged, and then it moves on to the consumer. So these are a lot of different steps for how coffee can get from the farm into your cup. There's also a lot of places for disruption along the way, which can affect the price of coffee. Any questions? Has anyone graded green coffee?
I've seen
before?
green coffee.
You've seen green coffee? It's graded it.
No.
Well, I would have loved to have brought some green coffee to look at, but Trish from Rocky Ball Coffee Roasters, she's a Q grader. She's one of, well, she has the credit of coining the term third wave coffee, and she's based out of San Francisco. She's one of the best there is, and she's going to review green coffee grading with us. We're going to watch this for about 2 minutes, and I found this to be just as good or better as having green coffee in your hands, because she's going to walk you through it. So let's take a minute and listen to what Trish has to say.
Oh hey, we're wrapping up our last batch here at Wrecking Ball in the roastery, and I thought I'd do a little green grading for you. So let's do some green grading of this green coffee sample. I'm just going to get right into it because I feel like I have a lot to tell you about. And why don't I just put my hands in there and start and let you know what I'm doing as I do it. First thing I've done is taken this sample of green coffee that was given to me and measured out 350 grams, as you can see, my beautiful Acaia scale. Now I'm ready to go. 350 grams is the standard that the Specialty Coffee Association asks us to measure our sample out at. Hopefully your importer will give you at least that much. Sometimes they'll give you a little bit less. If you really want to grade it, you might have to ask for more. I'm just going to get right into it, like I said, and the first thing I do when I get a sample is I dump it all out. And I make it flat like a pancake. And at this point, I'm going to put on my glasses. I'm going to put on my glasses. And everything that I find with just a quick look on my pancake comes out. It's a one kind of glance over the whole thing. My eyes are scanning it. And I'm just putting it all out there. Anything that looks weird, anything that looks a little bit suspect, even though because I have a lot of experience, know what I'm pulling out. You won't maybe know what I'm pulling out, but I'll show it to you. Exactly, and then when I think I've seen everything, I pull it together again, like I just dumped it, and toss it like this. And then I give myself another pancake, and already I'm seeing stuff I should have seen the first pass. Really big deal problems. And I'm pulling them out. When you do this kind of thing with a specialty grade coffee, you aren't going to get this much stuff. I'm pulling a lot of stuff out. because I spiked this sample for us so that we could show you all the defects that I possibly could show you, but in real life, your coffee's not gonna be this terrible. It might have some of these things, but not all of these.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop it right there. So one of the questions I should have asked before Trish started talking to us was, does anyone know why we grade green coffee? So why is she going through and picking out all these strange looking things?
Well, you wanna make sure that there's no bad parts.
Exactly. Exactly. Grading coffee it's a very standardized approach to grading the quality of coffee. And so she said here, hey, if specialty coffee doesn't actually have this much, I spiked the sample. So she was able to put in defects. There was a piece of corn in there, there's a stick. When I've done this, there's been bullets. There are wild things that will show up in a sample of green coffee. Now there's very specific numbers of, these are called defects, that are allowed in coffee samples, and that's how they are graded from specialty down to commercial grade. And we'll look at that a little bit later. But when roasters are deciding to buy a big sack of coffee, they will, generally it's already been graded by the exporter. They're gonna say, hey, I'm gonna send you something that is specialty grade, but you're gonna wanna do that as a roaster before you decide to hand over the price to your exporter. All right. Does anyone have any questions?
What's the grading scale? Is it numbers? How many
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool. We're gonna get into that next. All right. Okay, this is a shot of all the different types of defects that you'll be able to find. So within green coffee, you can find dried cherries, just shells. Those are coffee shells.
Like dried cherries or like coffee cherries?
Exactly.
Like, okay.
Yeah, so that somehow has not been processed properly. Floaters, these are ones that still have a parchment on it, and they just kind of rise up to the top. Brokens, little bits and pieces. Ones that have insect damage, so that's not something that you're going to want in your coffee. Blacks, like they're just shriveled up, they're called blacks. Some that are half black. Stinkers, that kind of says it all. You don't want those in your cup. And then, sticks and stones, literally. Now, depending on how many of these are in your sample, or then ultimately in your big sack of coffee, that's going to affect the taste. And one of the other reasons why a very rigid and specific coffee grading system is in place is, as I said before, that is how coffee farmers and coffee exporters are able to command a price. So they can't just say, yeah, this is really good and I want this much money. Yeah. The Specialty Coffee Association has guidelines on how you're going to evaluate it, call it specialty grade, and then they get into cupping and evaluating it for taste. And as you were saying, what are those guidelines? So there are 5 different grades. Grade 1 is specialty, grade 2 is premium, grade 3 is exchange level, and the specialty grade green coffee, there is to be no more than 5 full defects in 300 grams. So if you took any 300 gram sample in those big coffee sacks, like Trish was doing, she had 300 grams, within that, no more than 5 full defects and no primary defects. And so the defects are things like the full blacks, the full sours, the cherry pod, large stones. You can't, those primary defects can't be allowed. And then grade 2 premium coffee, this is premium, it's not your specialty. It is the same as specialty, except it has a bigger allowance for defects. And it can also have Quakers, and that's another type of defect bean. So they just have these different levels. Start talking about the exchange grade, which is no more than 9 to 23 full defects. And this is generally where grocery store coffee is. is in the grade 3 exchange style commercial grade coffee. And then anything below that, you can see we're talking about 24 to 86 defects. Like, think about Trisha's sample. She'll
So it
maybe
was like
have,
one farmer who just collected his beans and didn't clean them.
yeah, and a whole bunch of things would have gone wrong in the processing and the care, especially if you're thinking about the sample she had, which seemed like a lot, and she had spiked that.
Yeah.
But we're looking at upwards of 86. So it's nicely described as below standard grade coffee, and then just off grade. There are roasters who will take off grade coffee. The lower grade tends to be what gets freeze dried because you can, you're putting a really harsh process on it and you can mask some of the defects, or it's roasted really dark.
Because it already has no taste, so we can freeze dry it.
Yeah, you can
and
just
then
mask any defect taste. All right. So any questions here on how we're starting to distinguish what specialty is versus
Where does
lower
Tim
specialty?
Hortons land?
No. Actually, Tim Hortons is pretty good, as is McDonald's, because they know they've got a fairly discerning customer base.
Yeah.
And I would say it's probably grade 2. It's not specialty, they're not paying for it, and then either are consumers. So consumers, if they only want to pay $2.95 for a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
where Tim Hortons lands,
Yeah.
they can't buy specialty. And that's
Yeah.
also not quite the market. So there are different players definitely
Yeah.
in the different grades of coffee.
Like, you know you're buying a grade 2, grade 3.
Yeah, you're not paying $4 plus for a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And if you are gonna have a higher expectation on what that cup is gonna taste like. And it can only taste that way when there aren't those defect beans being roasted.
So when you buy like a sack of coffee, what's the cost difference between say 1, 2, and 3? Or 5?
That's a great question. It can be, so we could do a whole other workshop on coffee pricing, so stay tuned, we could do that. But it's determined by the commodity market, so the C market for coffee, which is priced in American dollars. So price difference for Canadian companies has that layer. It depends if it is fair trade coffee, that'll add another level, as well as certification. So is it organic? So you could have an organic specialty. Fair trade coffee is going to could be $4 more a pound, but that's raw goods. So that is just green. You have an added cost for roasting and storage and all of that on top. So definitely it can vary. There are some roasters that I know of, not that I know them, but that I know of that will buy as much as they can of the even ultra premium coffee that is graded. So there's graded and specialty, and then when they cup it, it's also assigned points. So it is, an 80 plus coffee, meaning it's just starting to get some of the best coffee there is. And there's some out there that will just buy all of that
So if you
because
buy
there's
the-
such little of it.
So if you buy the specialty coffee and then some of the lower grade one and just mix it so it tastes better?
Okay, and that's interesting.
So you get more for your money?
You could,
You're cutting it? Cocaine?
right? Well, there are blends, but what's really interesting in my experience is any of that lower grade coffee just would overshadow. It just takes a little bit. It takes
Yeah,
one
to take
stinker.
away the,
One stinker can make that whole cup that you're tasting and evaluating really terrible.
Really?
A little bit of mold, a little bit of over fermented beans in the cup. And that's also why when coffee roasters are evaluating coffee, they will have typically they cup it with 5 different cups, because it might only show up in one of those cups.
well, the bag is huge.
The bag is huge, and you're only taking a small sample of that bag, but you've done your sorting, you've done the evaluating. Now you'll take a sample and you roast it to a certain degree so that all the green coffees are being roasted at the same time.
So when they take those 5, they're at different
Mhm.
times? Like,
No,
Like-
so they will roast it to what's called a cupping roast. It's a specific roast level to evaluate all the types of coffee equally. So you can have your grade 3 versus your specialty, but it's all roasted to a certain standard so that it's evaluated evenly, like on an
Yeah.
equal playing field.
alright,
And they will do 5 cups for each one. So if I'm evaluating this Ethiopia, next to a Brazil, next to a Colombia, possibly all specialty, possibly different grades. It's all roasted the same, and each lot of coffee gets 5 cups.
And is it like wine where you spit it out?
Yeah. It's a great process. We are going to taste some coffee. So instead of cupping, which gets a little complicated, we are still going to taste coffee. So to compare and contrast. So any other questions here? Happy to guide the discussion to where we want. Okay. Now, within specialty coffee and coffee in general, actually within coffee in general, there is Arabica coffee and Robusta coffee. And I thought this was worth a brief discussion because the 2 different types of coffee plants are grown differently, but they can both end up in your cup. And I have a suspicion that one of the coffees that I'm going to have you look at may contain both varietals of coffee. Now, they're also priced differently. So it's interesting, you said, would you blend them? Often Arabica and Robusta can be blended. Robusta is a lower grade coffee. It will decrease the cost for a roaster.
Yeah.
It also has a distinct taste, but a lot of times it is blended into espresso blends because it has a lot of crema. So just some quick differences between the 2. Arabica has a lower resistance to pests. It is more delicate to grow. And Robusta, by its very nature, is just hardier. It has more resistance to pests and diseases, which is like leaf rust, which can happen on coffee plants. There is more Arabica, that's 60% of the production. It is more expensive to produce. It's more expensive to buy. And that is one of the reasons that you'll see specialty coffee and Arabica coffee is just more expensive. 40%, and it's less expensive on the Robusta side. Some taste differences. Robusta is a little bit nutty, kind of grassy, a little bit more straw-like. It has more caffeine. It's just how the plant grows, but not by much. Arabica coffee is fruitier, it's more acidic, it's got some smooth texture to it. The look of the bean is distinct. Now, Arabica coffee is oval, it is larger. It has that signature swirl in the middle of the bean, and I'll get you guys to take a look at that. Robusta is smaller. It's flatter on the top, and the line is straight down the middle. Now, actually, I'll pass this out to you here, John. Why don't you take a look and see there, if you can distinguish maybe which ones would be Arabica coffee and which ones might be Robusta.
This is all one?
That is a sample of coffee, but take a look and see if there's anything you can notice in there.
So there might be both in that?
There might be.
Oh, yeah, okay.
There is.
That's what I'm doing.
We're not trying to trick
No,
anyone.
the straight is Robusta.
Yeah, you can see they're smaller, and you can see there's that little line in between. So you see up here, these coffee beans, it's a little swirl.
Yeah.
That is more characteristic of Arabica coffee. You can see the smaller ones, they kind of look like a half circle, and then the line is very straight. They grow at different temperatures. They also grow at different elevations. Specialty Arabica coffee is generally grown a lot higher, at higher altitudes. And a little less rain. It can withstand lower temperatures. It can't actually withstand anything too high, but Robusta can, and it grows lower. A lot of the specialty coffees, the more specialty they are, often they are grown at even higher elevations.
Is that why Brazil and Colombia are such, they grow so much? Because the elevation is so different?
Mm-hmm. And they're also the land mass that they have available to them for production is also huge. They're the two, I mean, those countries have been set up and they have a long history of growing coffee in those countries. I'm gonna pass this one around as well. Now this one, you know, no surprises here. This is the Arabica coffee. This is the specialty coffee. But when I grabbed that sample, I got the best coffee that I could. It's an Ethiopia Yirgacheffe. Ethiopia is one of the higher quality origins. And I got a pea berry. So now we're talking, not only is it Arabica, but it's a pea berry and it's very small and
I
round.
was just gonna say, I thought they were supposed to be bigger.
Yeah, you're right, they are.
So that was the Arabica.
But you can also take a smell. So here, these are some
The one
ground
with the curve.
coffees. And generally, if we were gonna cup
Yeah,
it,
so that was the.
you
the
kind
blue
of
one,
hit the
Arabica.
side and that knocks
then
around the
straight
grounds a
one.
little bit. And then it releases
It's
some of the
supposed to be
aromas. So that's
smaller.
kind of what you can do.
So
And then
we
give
cup-
that
So
give
it'll
that a
make it
smell.
tinier.
We're going to, if we were gonna cup it, one of the steps is to smell the aroma of the dry
No,
grounds.
they won't be-
So I
these
thought
ones
that
are
might be a
roasted,
nice
so we don't find
opportunity.
any
You can
green
smell that, and now contrast
But
that to
it'll
this
be,
one.
Yeah, that description is
full.
for when they're green, but
It'll
these
be
are
round. and it'll
Contrast
be
it to the smell of
smaller.
that coffee.
So if they've got like.
Wanna
Smells
see
like
the small
dirt.
ones? These are Arabica for sure, or you're saying? you
Correct,
don't-
yeah, they are, yeah.
It's,
And it's from Yirgacheffe. It's Arabica, but it's a pea berry, so it doesn't follow exactly what I told you it would, but it is quite a specialty, and it's unique to have it be a pea berry. That's the dirt one,
I think it's, okay.
but which one do you like better? There's no wrong answers.
I don't think this is coffee. I think I
Oh.
got it in my garden.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you're putting coffee in your garden.
Well, you know me. I can make it.
Okay.
I'm getting better.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
What
my
else do you
gosh,
kn-
I mean,
You notice the difference?
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah?
I thought
my nose knows.
You notice
yeah,
those?
that's-
What do you notice about these beans?
Oh my gosh.
In contrast maybe to what you've got there, Tyler?
Yeah, none of them.
They're darker?
No, they're not.
Yeah, these ones are all the same, there's no mix.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they're so.
It was unexpected when I opened the bag when I got here, that they were pea berries. It wasn't on the label, which probably should have been. It's a selling feature. Because it is unique, it's smaller. Takes a lot more cherries to get the weight that you'll need to make a cup of coffee or a pot of coffee because they're so small. But anything else you notice in,
They're darker.
these ones are
Those
darker.
They're very greasy, like. do
They're
they-
oily, so they've been roasted to a level that actually oil starts to come out. It can go rancid a lot faster when it's roasted this dark. It's also, there's a lot, if you look at these ones, it looks like it's more full. They're roasted, the beans are bigger, obviously these are small. When they're roasted this dark, it actually,
Makes them puff up,
yeah, well,
like a cake. Like
kind of, but it's actually, it's burning away some of the cell structure, so they're lighter. So they're roasted dark. You to get the weight needed
Can you smell which one's
for
better?
the right brew ratio for a cup of coffee, you'll need more. Or if you put a pound of coffee in a bag, it's actually like it takes a lot more beans
This one working on
because you've
sounds neat.
roasted it to such a high level that you've actually burned off some of the organic
Cool, so
matter.
I can't smell.
Oh.
Which is a strategy for coffee roasters that may not be using a really high quality coffee. They will roast it to a level where you're not actually tasting the defects, you're tasting the roast. So really roasty coffees may not be
This is not
as
greasy.
specialty, maybe as they're marketed
Dark,
to
so
be,
this
or
one- Yeah, let's do it.
they just happen to be roasted to a level of consistency to taste like roast. Yes.
what's a French roast?
A French roast is a really dark roast. So it's not coffee from France. It is a dark roast. And I mean, a lot of people enjoy that. There is nothing wrong with enjoying a dark roast of coffee because I'll always say
So you have the French one.
it's still the coffee that you enjoy drinking.
Yeah.
But when it is roasted darker, that's what you're tasting versus the origin of the coffee. So if you think back to those commercials that we had, the one, I mean, we had the 50s housewife, but then when you talk about it in the 90s and they're smelling it, that typically the grocery store coffee is roasted a little darker. Part of it is for consistency, because you can get coffee from all over the world, which different origins will taste different because of the growing conditions, because of the soil, the climate, just where those beans are made, where they're grown. But if you roast it to a certain level and you're just tasting the roast, it kind of neutralizes any inherent origin taste. So they may not want to tell you about all the origin taste because they've roasted it out and it isn't the highest quality. But then if you think about how it was being positioned, and that film was from 2015, starting to talk about specialty coffee as a movement and as something that's really pretty precious. They're talking about the origin, they're talking about the work of the farmer, they're talking about the cultivation, and they're showing the people whose hands actually, it's an amazing film, but whose hands go in and take the little plants and plant them, and the work that it does, and the families that rely on this for their livelihood. It is a pretty cool film. All right. Let's taste some coffee.
I can't remember which one was it.
Well, it's not necessarily important if you have mixed up cup 1 and cup 2. More
Reach
to
over
take a
and grab
look at
the
the
other one.
differences.
Just compare the two.
Like, I feel like cup
Between the
2 is like super bitter.
That's possible. So while you're enjoying the cup 1 and cup 2, I wanted to show you one of the tools that the specialty coffee industry uses for evaluating the taste components. This is called the Coffee Taster's Wheel. And this is a version that Counterculture Coffee, which is a major specialty coffee roaster and retailer in the United States, has designed. But what it has are some of the major tastes, and wine has one very similar to this. Those are the major tastes that you'll find in coffee, like chocolate might be a flavor note that is commonly used. Like if you're looking at a coffee packaging, you say, oh, this is Baker's chocolate, or fruity. And then here you've got earthy, herbal, savory, spicy, roast. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, is a very common flavor that you'll find in coffee. Then you start to get more specific. So within fruit, you can have citrus fruit. You can have melons, grapes, stone fruit, berries.
And when they have this fruit flavor, they're not putting, like, it's just they happen to be grown near these fruit things. Like, how does it have this fruit flavor?
Because of the different chemical compounds
In
in
the
coffee.
coffee.
Yeah, it's a really complex food.
Yeah.
And so it isn't necessarily that, oh, this
different
is
types. Like,
this
as
was
in
by the-
different grapes make different flavors. and
Exactly,
whatnot.
yeah. So different varietals of coffee, which is why the Robusta tastes one way, Arabica tastes a different way. Then where is it grown? What are the soil conditions? Is it a shade-grown coffee? Higher elevations tend to have more flavorful coffee because of the oxygen conditions at the higher elevations and different things to enhance the flavors.
There's, a couple. So
Sure.
like, you know how wines have like vintages, years, because they have a
Mhm.
certain growing season? So
Yeah.
one, my thought is like, why don't they have it like that? Is it, but then like a year, is there a growing season then for
There is.
all year round? If it's in Colombia,
Well,
they might-
yeah.
they might have to go all year round, or could go all year round.
Yeah, there are different cycles for different origins. So there'll be the harvest season, and coffee is definitely fresher and tastes better when it's an in-season coffee. So the longer the coffee has been, say, sitting around in storage in a burlap bag, it can actually start to take on some of the characteristics. It's baggy. That's a coffee that has baggy taste, because it's been sitting in a warehouse somewhere, which may or may not have the best humidity conditions, and it's sitting in a burlap bag for maybe years. So that coffee is generally called baggy. A lot of importers will start to mark the coffee down, and what maybe once might be more specialty has started to deteriorate. It's not quite the same as wine, where it can be bottled and stored, and now that's a good vintage. Old crop or past season coffees they won't usually taste as good. But George Howell, who was in a film about coffee, he started to get really quite innovative with freezing green coffee, and then freezing different years, different crops, different grades of coffee, and like deep freezing in like special freezers, and then bringing it out and selling it so you could actually find a way to preserve what might be a really rare, special small lot of coffee. Which is another characteristic between specialty coffee and commercial coffee. Specialty coffee, as its smaller portion, is generally grown on smaller farms. So you'll have a family that could be very dedicated to that plot of coffee, and then they're only harvesting a certain amount. So the rarity of it can also command a higher price. Higher taste. So I've given you a copy of this. This again is a whole other workshop. So stay tuned. We can work just on coffee
It
taste.
is February.
Yeah, it's amazing next time. But it is really neat when you get into spices. You've got licorice, clove, leathery, and there's different tools the coffee industry uses to start to train your palate to taste these items. Because right now it probably just tastes like coffee, and you're probably like, this is a good coffee, and this is maybe not as good. Or did you notice any difference in
Well,
the two
one
cups?
was like, I can't swallow that, and
Okay.
then the other one was like, okay, I'm used to having like
Okay, tasted a little more
milk and
familiar.
sugar and stuff, so it's like,
Yes,
okay, this one I can
it's still
drink,
black, but
it's just missing my, I don't like
Yeah.
black coffee usually, so
Okay.
One
that's
I-
where it's like, this one I can actually drink.
yeah. One I felt had an aftertaste.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sour,
Just
like,
kind
it
of
was almost
sat
sour.
there and like, nah.
Bitter.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
That's actually
bitter
what
aftertaste.
Right.
You
I
still,
did-
the Tyler still tastes it, the sour taste.
You can still taste it. Yeah, definitely. Well,
It's like lingering on the tongue.
so you noticed that it was actually the opposite of sour.
Bitter.
Yeah. There's just
Nice.
some, yeah. Well, the coffee oils definitely can linger on your tongue. Yes.
Did you taste these?
I haven't tasted them yet.
Okay. I thought I would like to get your opinion.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yes,
good.
what's the answer?
I know.
What, if you tasted it, what would these be?
Okay, I will. Can I taste those two cups?
No, not mine.
Okay, because you're not well.
Yeah.
Okay. I was more concerned with participants to get a chance to taste it, but I will. We have
Yes.
some.
Okay.
This I wanted to also put up there, and it's one of the newer flavor wheels, but this is actually for defects and taints and faults. So it is, well, of all the types
Stale
of
bread.
the defects. What's that?
It tastes like stale bread.
Stale bread, yeah. It tastes baggy. There's one of them, right?
Yeah.
Definitely a defect. Mold. When mold hits a cup, when you're cupping coffee, it is like a punch in the face. It's unreal. So these are the biggest ones. Over roast. can
So if
also
you
be a
smell the mold,
You
do
can.
you not drink it? Like, do you, like,
well,
can you
it's
pass on that?
it's like
Or you have to still
no, you
drink
do
it?
because you know what it is. It's like, oh, this milk smells bad, and you keep smelling it. It's like, oh, it tastes this is really moldy. So unbelievably, we like make sure you taste that cup. And it's the cupping is communal, so like you kind of do this double spoon thing where you're not sipping from the same cup.
Yeah.
But when there's a defect, everybody wants to taste it. Then the more prominent it is, the better, because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
But
True.
yeah, mold. And then this type of lexicon. Okay, Band-Aid is one of them. Whew, this
Yeah, I was looking
lexicon.
at Band-Aid.
Did you notice that? Well, this.
I was looking at that.
Yeah, this lexicon is so that people are using a common language to describe it. So we kind of know maybe what the expectation of Band-Aid, baggy, sweet peas, and that's why, okay, if you get mold in a cup, everyone wants to try it because we are learning and we're training our palates. What was I gonna say? Yeah, anyways, these are, it's a standardized lexicon of words. Oh yeah, it was, coffee and smells are, they unlock memories, and I very distinctly remember going through cups of coffee and trying it, and getting one that I thought tasted like Christmas ornaments. And it's that sort of musty kind of like
stale blocks, old
stale,
blocks.
like
that you-
exactly. But no, like, hey, where's that on the wheel? We have to, all right. Well, we've kind of discussed, but this was here, talk amongst yourselves, coffee. Well, actually, at this point, let's just take a minute, just between yourselves, think about the coffee you've tasted, think about the discussion we've had over the differences with specialty side and commercial side, and just what are one or two or maybe three differences that you can articulate and identify in specialty coffee versus commercial grade coffee. So maybe you can talk.
Well, this one reminds me of tea.
Yeah. So that was the first one. That was number one. So the number one was the better one.
Well, up to you to decide.
Depends on what's number one.
I like number one first.
Mm-hmm.
But what,
That
so
one
we're
there, you like the flower one better?
the not strong one, the first one. The flower one, yeah.
You like the flower one better? Jimmy passes back to me.
Some people like what is familiar to them. No, just
Well,
because
I
it's
like
commercial.
Because usually,
Honestly,
No.
just because it's commercial grade
This is,
coffee doesn't mean it is.
I think that's,
Well, that
The
is
hard
something
one-
we've identified. There
the
are
hard one
differences.
is cup 2.
It's Arabica.
that was the bitter, harsher one, bolder
It's the
one.
cacao one.
Yeah.
2 is?
2 is the cacao one.
I'm gonna go pour myself a cup of each, but just talk amongst yourselves. And it doesn't have to be specifically
Like,
what are the differences between the cups, but think
Yeah.
about, just reflect on what we've chatted about and what are some differences that you can identify between.
like it's smooth. Like this one is smooth, whereas this one I'm like,
This one tasted sour.
that's right.
It's
I've
not,
never
as-
tasted
it's not, as-
sour.
it's not.
Which
as-
one's
gonna pour
which
myself
one's
It
the
tastes
sour
really
one?
sour to me. But it tastes different than the first time I tried it.
It's milder.
You cooled down.
That second one's, oh my god.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh my god. No, okay. Oh my god, why
Why are you
is
just
it?
getting to it now? It's,
Oh my
That's what
god,
happens
it's
to
getting
me.
worse.
That's what happened to me because I was drinking the first one and I'm like, oh, it's a bit sour.
I don't know, the
And
first.
then it's like not my normal cup, and then it's like I drink that and I'm like,
Well, this one didn't linger. It tasted kind of sour at the start, but then.
sour.
Mm-hmm.
Like now that it's
Oh,
like
it's
I
way
can,
smoother. Okay, okay.
right, like I can drink more of it now
Yeah,
that it's
this one
cooled
was
down
very
a bit. It's
bittery.
like not, it's like not hot
Coffee
anymore. So
should
it's,
taste different as it cools.
oh, okay,
Okay,
that's why I
because
can
when
get
when
we
it
that.
tastes
cup-
very different.
Yeah, they do taste quite different. They're different grades.
Yeah.
They are different origins.
Yeah.
Well, the
And
origin
quality,
of the blend wasn't really identified, and a lot of times that won't be disclosed if they've blended it, or that also gives the roaster the flexibility to use different crops, different origins as they need to, because they're also probably trying to get a price point.
Yeah.
I'll just give you another minute. I'll give you a topic. Specialty coffee,
It's not
that's
specialty or
different,
coffee.
nor coffee. Well, commercial is neither, commercial coffee is neither, okay, it's not a coffee.
Like what's commercial? Like what's considered commercial? Like just big mass production.
It is usually available on a larger scale. Well, that's right, let's brainstorm together. Okay, so we'll summarize, we've got. So some hallmarks or some characteristics of specialty coffee. Commercial.
So it's smoother, like
Specialty was smoother.
yeah.
So taste. So taste elements or taste descriptors. Would you say that is a plus?
Yes.
Generally better. And down the commercial level coffee.
It's like you're just drinking for the sake of drinking it. So it's like
Okay, and so the reasons behind drinking it.
it's my 4th or 5th cup of coffee. Doesn't really matter.
Reasons to drink
It's
is
coffee.
so functional maybe. let's say functional versus the taste experience.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
agree with that.
Yes, I
Functional
agree.
making. Right.
Like I'm not really thinking, like I'm not sitting and enjoying my coffee, I'm just drinking my coffee and I gotta go.
Okay.
Right,
So
like
not
it's a
not always
drive
not always
through.
tasty. Okay. Yeah. Not always tasty. So it is a caffeine delivery system.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Okay.
Sometimes routine.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really relate with this because I just drink coffee for the flavor.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
you'd
you would
rather
want to
specialty.
seek out, so taste
Yeah.
descriptors are better, so it's enjoyed and you drink for the flavor.
Like
Like
I use that machine. I put milk and sugar in it, and then lay down and taste it.
Yeah.
Sit down with it.
Now, if you
I don't
were
need
to,
that.
what are some other ways that we know a coffee is specialty? You could
it's
think,
from the little coffee shops.
yeah, it's more available at
Like
coffee
specific
shops.
places.
Yeah.
So you, is the how did you call it, Robusto?
Robusta, yeah, Robusta.
Is that always commercial?
That's an interesting question. Lately, there has been a push to grow and roast better Robusta. So it starts by growing it, and before it just was always thought about as a lower quality coffee, and little bits would be blended in for a distinct taste, or like I said, with espresso blends, it produces a lot more crema. Now there is a full criteria for evaluating Robusta coffee, and it is different than Arabica. So the coffee flavor wheel, the grading, the defects, and the people behind how that gets graded. You can be a Q grader for coffee, that's all for Arabica. Now you can be an R grader for Robusta coffee, and you're looking at different criteria and different flavors generally, and just a different way of scoring it. So there has been a push to elevate what that variety of coffee can be.
Oh, okay.
So they've tasted some not so great Robusta, and
Yeah.
there's some good stuff.
Okay.
Like if it's done
You-
properly
yeah.
specific for Robusta, then
You
It'll
wouldn't
bring
really
out
drink
what
a cup
it's-
of it. Like it's just that flavor's just too intense. But
Yeah.
put into blends, yeah, yeah, sure. There's a remarkable difference between those two cups.
definitely. And it wasn't the way it was made.
No, that was standardized, so you can evaluate it on the content, on the beans itself. Any other stark differences between the two? Think about the green that goes in. So, in commercial, it doesn't necessarily mean Robusta coffee, but as I said, you can get specialty Robusta, you in either variety, you can get them in the specialty or commercial, but these categories are for the grading of the coffee. So it is generally a grade 3 with a certain number of defects, and then specialty, well, it's its own category. Generally grade 1 and 2.
And like the specialty would have more options, like it's like your fancier drinks, whereas like the commercial's like this or this.
Yeah, exactly. Generally, the commercial grade coffee isn't what you'll get espresso for. That'll be generally specialty. So this would have like more espresso based drinks. And also it often comes in single origins. And that's one of the differences between these two. The commercial grade grocery store coffee is a blend. They didn't identify the origins on the package. The other specialty coffee is a Ethiopian Yirgacheffe pea berry specialty with detail of farm down to the specific origin, and probably you could dial it in a little further to see what smallholder farm that's from.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you can see on roasters' websites, they will list information about the farmer or the family and growing conditions and elevation. And that's a way of justifying the price
Yeah.
that it costs, because that information is known, and then we go back to that supply chain and the traceability. That's why that level of information is really important for coffee roasters and importers to be able to identify, and it helps with marketing specialty coffee.
So then that'd be easier now with a lot of the digital stuff. Whereas before they couldn't offer that because it was.
Yeah, a lot of the technology.
Somebody didn't
for
write
sure.
it down, then it's not there.
Yeah, and the blockchain technology, which enhances the traceability back to the farm, and just that whole level of detail in like the last 20 years that I've been involved in seeing the industry, the evolution at the farm level and the science behind it, and the investment that bigger coffee companies are doing. Starbucks is one of them, investing in how the coffee is grown and innovation at the farm level, all leads to better specialty coffee.
And then when there's like decaf, does decaf do both of them? Like
Yes, specialty and commercial.
they'll do all the
Yeah, for
grades?
sure. And we could do another module on that. Different decaf coffee processes.
You know about the decaf
I do.
process?
A lot of detail on decaf and different processes for, well, no, there's not different processes for specialty or commercial, but different processes tend to lend itself better to specialty coffee because it can do smaller batch sizes, where there are commercial decaffeinators, which are really decaffeinating it, not for the coffee's sake, but for the caffeine's harvesting sake,
Yeah.
which is pretty interesting in itself. And Robusta coffee doesn't decaffeinate the same way as Arabica does, because it's higher in the oils and it has a higher caffeine content and soluble solids, and the diffusion that it needs to take for what a process for Robusta isn't ideal, but there's parameters that can be adjusted.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I told you.
keep in mind, some of the things that we talked about. So when you are searching for specialty coffee, when you're looking for a great coffee experience, when you're starting to feel a little bit sleepy, there's some options that you can do and some things you can think about when you're on the hunt for a good cup of coffee. And you may not always want specialty, but commercial grade has a role for you as well. And they do go through the same supply chain, so there are lots of similarities as well. And keep that in mind when you think about when you might use the information from this course to go out and seek the best cup of coffee you can, when that's what you're looking for.
I'll be more willing to pay for that
You
specialty.
may be more
'cause
willing to
I don't
pay.
wanna
I
drink
know that
rocks
there's
and
more
sticks.
effort put into it.
Yeah,
What's that? Because I don't want to drink rocks and
you
sticks.
don't wanna do,
Yeah.
well, you will get the rocks and sticks in your cup, but the roaster will it will show up, and sometimes it shows up in grinders too. So sometimes it gets roasted. There's, honestly, corn makes it. So thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. I know that we could have started with a cup of coffee, and that's something that I may think about for the next time. Start with some coffee early on. But your attention throughout has been invaluable, and I hope you've enjoyed the discussion that has come from this, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.